Yes, sure. So, as you said, my name is Ellie, and I'm currently living in the United Kingdom, in England, doing my PhD in the Book of Job. But I'm from the US originally. Yeah, yeah. So that honestly is a little bit of a funny way in that I didn't start my PhD in the Book of Job with a very clear sense of what the text is doing and why and how. Um, But I really wanted to prioritize studying the Bible in a way that I thought would be really useful for the church. And so I had a sort of a small idea for the book of Job from a class I took when I was in college. And from there, developed the idea, sent it to my current supervisor, who's at Cambridge. And she thought, so thought that that would be a compelling, viable project. And so off I went, but just thought this is going to be a real learning curve for me because I don't really know what to do with Job. Yes. So when I was in college, I did my undergraduate degree in biblical studies. And then afterwards, I went to do some master's work at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in the US. And so there I studied Old Testament and biblical languages with a bit more depth. And then from there, came to Cambridge and started the PhD in Job. Yeah, when I was born, I was immediately enfolded into a Christian community because my parents are strong Christians and were very involved in a local church. I even went to a Christian private school all the way through my elementary to high school years. So I was very much growing in biblical literacy and seeing a lot of men and women around me who really modeled Christian discipleship in lots of helpful and beautiful ways. So, of course, growing up in that context doesn't mean that you're automatically owning the faith of your family as your own. However, yeah, from a very young age, I expressed interest in walking with the Lord. And then I really now look back and see God as this tender, masterful father raising me like a parent raises their child as I was growing up, maturing me, growing me in wisdom over many years, often in lots of quiet ways. Um, and when I was in middle school, so when I was about 12 to 14 years old, I really did wrestle with faith for a period, just asking lots of fundamental questions. Not because I didn't want to be a Christian, but because I very much did, and needed to make sure that I could, yeah, understand and articulate what it is that I was claiming to build my life on. Um, and then, yeah, from there, increasingly started asking questions of fruitfulness. Okay, what do I do with what I've been given? It's been this great privilege to be, yeah, walking with the Lord for these many years and seeing what Christian community looks like. And now, how do I, yeah, in the ways that God has called me to be a channel of His blessing to others. So, yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell, um, my faith journey. We talked about the Bible a lot at home. I don't remember Bible memory particularly being a focal point or a central feature of Bible instruction in the home. However, when I was at school, because it was a Christian school, I did do some Bible memory in that context. And actually, some of those passages are still there that I memorized from a long time ago. Um, yeah, I could still recite the Christmas story in Luke 2 off by heart just because I memorized it when I was in school. So when I was in college, I think my third year of study in university, I began taking some biblical Hebrew courses. And then just gradually, as I've continued in theological education since then, have had various opportunities to study a bit more in Hebrew and use Hebrew increasingly in the way that I write and research. Um, yeah, and it has been, oh, the most precious gift to be able to start to explore the biblical text in the original languages, Hebrew and Aramaic for the Old Testament and Greek for the New Testament. I think one of the aspects that really stands out to me is the fresh eyes that it gives me as I look at the text. So growing up in a Christian context, you become quite accustomed to certain stories and phrases, and there's something really precious about having the Bible in our own heart language. That's really important. Though sometimes that can create a sense of over familiarity where we're not as sort of arrested, we're not as struck and gripped by the text as we might be. And so coming to it in a different language, in the original language, really forces me to slow down, and it makes me catch all sorts of things that I may not have been paying as much attention to. And they're just ways in which Hebrew works as a language that cause you to see connections within the text and between different texts that unavoidably sometimes get lost in translation. I think it's also just shown me how beautiful the Bible is. Yes, the Bible is true. The Bible is also beautiful. I mean, it's an exquisite work of literature authored by many different humans over a long period of time, and obviously all under ultimately God's authorship. So I think that's been such a joy as well, is just to delight in the really sweet honey that the Bible is, and the riches that it is to just mine for a lifetime. I'll never reach the end, but I'm happy to just start digging. So yeah, those have been some of the benefits. Yeah, I think both are valid, both are important. Certainly a book like the Psalms, that's the prayer and song book of ancient Israel in a lot of respects. And so it's a great resource that we have to be able to pray through the words of the Psalms in a whole range of life experiences and emotions. I mean, you really have such a breadth in the Psalms in that respect. Um, I think also because we see so much prayer in the scriptures, it really does give us precedent for using our own voices, articulating to God in the context of our own lives, very honestly and openly with Him. What we're thinking, feeling, wrestling with. And the book of Job, along with plenty of the Psalms, would certainly be one of those places that really showcases this honest wrestling with God. In fact, most of the book we're wondering about Job. Are you allowed to say that? He speaks in some ways that we can find really almost abrasive in just the kinds of things he'll say about God at various points. And that it is not the case that everything he says is sanctioned, is legitimate. God does rebuke him at the end of the book. However, I take it as really central to understanding the book of Job that God answers Job. That's really dignifying and commends Job for speaking to him. And so I think, the book of Job has influenced my prayer life in several ways. I think one of them is just this summons to intercede, that I take it that God's rebuke to the friends is actually that they failed in intercession. They didn't speak to God about Job. They only spoke to Job about God. And I think that's a really critical difference. And so myself, when I engage with suffering in the lives of people around me and the world at large, I want to think primarily about going to God in prayer, identifying with the sufferer, and praying on their behalf. And I think it's also my whole engagement with the book of Job, which is a really challenging text. Like the whole process of engaging with it has been a wrestling match in a lot of respects. And I've needed to continue on the assumption that it is worthwhile because it's God's word. Even if I'm ignorant, even if I have no idea what the text is doing at a given point, just to keep pressing in rather than backing away. A lot of times when we find things confusing or hard in the Bible, we want to back away. But actually, no, there's this invitation to go in deeper, keep searching, keep praying, keep talking with others, wrestle with the text. And yeah, trust God's wisdom, trust that it is worthwhile. And then you just get to find out. And that's a great adventure, actually. Yeah, I guess maybe the first thing to say is that I'm probably just quite weird in a lot of respects. So I'll tell you what I did, and you can see, yeah, what may or may not be useful. I'm a very visual learner. So for me to look at the words is basically what my brain needs. And then I just need to repeat, 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 repeat. So yeah, for me, it really was a matter of just looking at the text in the same format every time. I was trying to create some consistency for my brain. So I would, yeah, look at the same block of text in the same size, just to keep it as consistent as possible. And then I just say it over and over in my head, trying to say it out loud as much as possible. Sometimes I kind of have to whisper if I'm in the library, but trying to say it out loud as well as in my head to get my ears engaged a bit as well. And then I did a lot of pacing. So I would look at the text and then I'd walk away and start pacing and saying the text over and over until I felt that that verse or two verses were secure. And then I'd go back and check the next ones. And then once I had built up blocks of material, I would go over any given portion of the text every single day until I was positive that I wouldn't lose anything if I started doing it every other day. And then I would only switch to every 3 days once I was positive that it wouldn't go anywhere. So I managed to make my way through the whole book of Job without losing anything that I had memorized previously. So, of course, the longer you go, the more challenging that becomes because you just are accumulating so much material to store in your mind. But I, at that point, started creating rotations of chapters. So there would be certain chapters I could go over every other day. And so I would alternate those. And some others that I'd been doing for a long time that I could do every 3 day. And so then you have 3 groups of chapters that are rotating. And so by the end, it got a little bit complicated, actually, just to keep track of what I needed to practice on any given day. But yeah, essentially it was just relentless repetition because I didn't want to lose anything. And that made it that by the time I finished the book, yeah, it really was all there. I didn't finish chapter 42 and then need to go back and relearn the first half of the book. Yeah, and as you mentioned, the longer you go and the more comfortable you become, the more you can take the scriptures with you on the road. You can be walking somewhere and have the text in your mind. You can be washing dishes at home or getting a shower and you have the text and you can practice. Something I didn't have the advantage of that your mothers and students will is doing it in community. I think that would be a really joyful dimension of memorizing, is that you can help each other, you can keep each other accountable. Yeah, and practice together in all sorts of different settings when the time arises. So it was, because it was just me, it was, yeah, up to me to kind of set my schedule and stay disciplined. I'm quite an early riser, so I would do most of it in the morning when my brain was the freshest. Yeah, I would say as a starting point, certainly memorizing within your own heart language to make sure that you actually understand what you're saying. I would say that's priority. So, I mean, growing up, I memorized in English. Yeah, that was what I did. I would say once someone has started learning a bit of Hebrew, which, yes, if anyone is ever inclined to learn Hebrew, I will only recommend it. That's, yeah, a tremendous way to exercise your curiosity and so worth it. And once someone has started that, then I think beginning to memorize in Hebrew could be a really helpful way of starting to internalize the language. Even if you find a song that's in Hebrew and sort of are learning the Hebrew text to music, that could just be one really helpful way of starting to get a better feel for how the language sounds and works. But yeah, I would say that's probably a second step after beginning to learn the language. Not that you have to be an expert by the time you decide to memorize Psalm 1 in Hebrew, say, but helpful to have a bit of understanding of how the language works. Yeah.